The question is from the IG comment section on a Flow State podcast clip. Look at that. The question is, what was your hardest freestyle skill to master, and did you do it before you became popular? This is an interesting question because there have been many challenges at different phases of my career. So, it kind of depends on what part of my career as a freestyler I'm looking at in terms of what the biggest challenge was at that time. And because my skill set was constantly kind of like building on itself one brick at a time, it's hard to objectively assess which skill was actually the hardest, because any one of the skills that came later would have been impossibly hard to even wrap my head around in the beginning, right? So, but with that in mind, I think in some ways, it's fair to say that the hardest freestyle skill to master was set up punchline, which is, it's like, really, Harry, you talk about set up punchline all the time. You say it's like the most foundational, kind of like most basic way of doing it. And that's true in a sense. It is very foundational. But it's also really hard if you've never done it, and if you've never practiced it, and if you haven't put the time in. And it took me a long, long time to develop the ability to seamlessly do this thing called setup punchline. And yes, I have talked about it a million times. Very quickly, for anybody who's just now tuning in and doesn't know what it is that I'm talking about. What is setup punchline? Setup punchline is just when you receive a random input as a freestyle rapper, and just for simplicity, we'll just say it's a random word. That's probably the most common thing that happens is I ask somebody to throw me a random word, right? So they give me a random word, like keyboard. Setup punchline is just the act of taking that random input, the word keyboard, making that a target word, and then quickly improvising a rhyming couplet where the end of the first line is not the target word, it's a word that rhymes with the target word. And then the end of line 2 is the target word, in this case, keyboard. So that would be, get the blue ribbon, I'm coming for the reward. Rap is not my type, no keyboard, as an example, right? That's set up punchline.
Opposite of what's natural to do almost.
Exactly.
When anyone jumps into a freestyle, usually it's you have a word and then you're trying to like find that escape hatch before the next bar. Like
100%. That's the natural, organic way to do it, right? Which is called, like, I call it free flowing, which is a beautiful approach too. That's where everybody starts. So that's where if somebody says coffee, you go, sipping on a coffee, right? Immediately. And then from there, yo, can't nobody stop me, lob me the words while I drop these verses, because they couldn't top me on the chart. I'm probably about to drop a philosophy, and so on and so forth. Awesome, beautiful, can be insanely powerful. And you can just get really good at that in theory and not ever even check out setup punchline. But if you don't ever check out setup punchline and really spend some time with it, I believe you are vastly limiting your potential as a freestyler. And to me, setup punchline is like the ollie, to make a comparison to skateboarding. Like, and I'm not a skateboarder, so please forgive my ignorance as I don't know. There's somebody, we need to get like Rodney Mullen on here or somebody who could really speak to this. But, yes, so yeah, let's do that. I did skate for 2 years, 4th and 5th grade. And I was never very good at it. But, one thing that stood out to me even at the time was that skateboarding had such a high barrier to entry, it felt like, because the ollie is almost like not even a trick. It's almost like a utility, It's like you have to be able to ollie to do any of the other tricks that you're hoping to do, And of course, there's a long history of skateboarding pre-ollie. So there are lots of tricks that people were doing, like, back in the 80s and stuff like that. But in terms of like, do a kickflip, do a heel flip, do a shove it, go down those stairs, get up on that rail, do a grind, like all this sort of like modern like skateboard vocabulary that we know from like the Tony Hawk video games and stuff like that. The ollie is just like a utility that gets you off the ground so that you could potentially do said trick. And it's not easy, that's the thing. It's like not easy to learn how to ollie. So it's like, hey, if you want to do any of these cool tricks, you first have to learn how to do this thing called an ollie, and it might take you weeks, I think it took me more than weeks. I think it took me more than a month. I don't know. I don't remember. It took me a long time to even be able to do that. And when I first did it, I couldn't even do it that well, right? So let alone to like get high off the ground or like to really like nail it and do it confidently. And so in that sense, skateboarding felt like it had a high barrier to entry. And I look at setup punchline technique as the ollie of freestyling. And that's why I say, in a sense, it was the hardest freestyle skill that I ever had to master, because once I unlocked setup punchline, and that took several years, to get to a point where where it wasn't just me doing it once, in isolation like I did with keyboard, but like I could have a random word generator up and just keep on pressing spacebar every couplet, and just every word, just keep on doing a setup punchline couplet that has coherency and makes sense and works and is rhythmically sound. To get to that point with it took a really long time. But once I was able to do that, it unlocked like all these other techniques, not instantly, but it showed me the way, where it was like, oh, okay, I can finally get my skateboard off the ground. Now I can start trying to do a kickflip, but before you could get your skateboard off the ground, you can't even, kickflip is completely out of reach, So it's like a cornerstone or like a keystone to the arch. It's like none of the other pieces can work. The whole thing falls apart without it. And once you have it, you always have it. And I still work on it. And I still start my practice sessions with setup punchline, like every time. And there's still stuff about it where, issues will be revealed to me while I'm practicing it, where I'll be like, okay, I got to work on that, So I never would even say that I've mastered it. But in a sense, once you can flow with it continuously, you can kind of flow with it continuously. You can kind of just do it. And, as long as my voice doesn't give out, I could sit there with the random word generator for hours and hours and hours and hours, and I would be able to flow with that. And so that to me is so foundational to everything else that I do. So many of the other techniques are just adding on to that. Like, okay, well, let me see if I could do a rhyme inside a rhyme, on the second half of that couplet in bar 2. So like, Sam, give me a word.
Audio.
Nice. So basic setup punchline for audio would be like, I'm in the clouds, spitting the godly flow, turn up the wave for the audio. That's basic setup punchline. But okay, how would I do a rhyme inside a rhyme? Okay, same thing, but I just got to sneak 2 little rhyming words in on the second half. So sitting on a cloud, spitting godly flows, it goes down, peep the sound of the audio. That's a rhyme inside a rhyme, right? Or like, oh, how would I do an A-B rhyme scheme live? Okay, well, it's the same as setup punchline, but I have to free associate a word from audio, like sound, and I have to rhyme with that first at the beginning of line 1. So now it's getting very complicated. It can become very mentally overwhelming when you first try to do it, but the core of it is setup punchline. So A-B would be like, it's about to go down. Check out the godly flow. Turn up the sound. Peep the raw audio. Right? A-B. And so all these other different things, or it's like, well, what if I just, instead of a basic setup punchline, what if I stack more rhymes? So like there's 2 rhymes in the first bar and even an additional rhyme in the second bar. Like, you should probably know, I got the godly flow. You oughta, bro. Just peep the audio. You can't stop me though. I'm untoppable. It's all sort of like I'm just stacking things into setup punchline. I'm just layering on top of setup punchline. But without setup punchline, none of it would work. None of it would make any sense. These are my kick flips and heel flips and shove its and, doing a 5-stair or whatever. First, I had to learn how to ollie. So that's what I would say. And then, just real quickly at other parts of my career, other challenges became really hard. Like, when I first started doing videos, I feel like the biggest challenge was it was revealed to me that I had an over-reliance on filler phrases, which I've talked about quite a bit too, like how I would start every couplet with, hey, yo, it's Harry Mack, or when I'm on the mic. A lot of people say, I don't give a damn, or like, I don't even care, or whatever. There's all these sort of classic filler phrases that emerge organically or that we hear from other people and start incorporating. And, I didn't even know that I was so reliant on these filler phrases until we started doing videos and posting them. People were like, why do you say your name so much? I was like, what? And it's so interesting because freestyling really is a live art, and it's such an energy thing. And I think when you're performing live, or if you're in a cypher or just hearing somebody freestyle in public, the filler phrases just disappear, like for most people, audience included. Like you actually just like don't even hear them, Because as long as the punchlines are hitting and the rhythm is in the pocket and the energy is right and you're incorporating things live, everyone's like, this is flawless. It was only when we started doing videos and then you could listen to it out of context so you're not actually in the live energy with me. And then it started to really stand out how often I was saying, hey, yo, it's Harry Mack. And then until I watched it back, then it stood out to me too. I was like, damn, you're right. Wow. I didn't even know I was saying it that much because they were disappearing to me too. And that's one of those love-hate things. I think filler phrases are necessary and they're great, and I still use them, not even necessarily consciously, but they emerge sometimes to help me connect the dots and to take little mental breaths while I'm improvising. But I had an over-reliance on them. And so that became a really hard skill to master, was like, how do I get rid of those filler phrases and just make it this smooth, continuous flow? And then most recently, I would say memory. Issues pertaining to memory have become kind of like the hardest thing, where I'm like, yo, there's a lot to be done with just being able to hold words in the mind and not let go of them. And obviously, like, yeah, when I gather 14 words like we did in the MLB backstage at the MLB event or whatever, there's a video of me doing 14 words. Now there's quite a few videos of me doing a lot of words, but that still might be one of the most words ever on a video. Like, actually, there's one with UC Health that might have more. I don't know. But that is hard, right? And then the TED Talk gave me an opportunity to test my memory in even more challenging ways. So I won't say too much about it, but once it's out, you'll see. And you may or may not pick up on it, because actually it was kind of subtle, but memory became a really big challenge to executing the TED performance in the way that I wanted to. So I think that's kind of like the frontier right now is how to hold more in my memory, and also how to be more comfortable speaking eloquently on other subjects than just typical battle rhymes. Like, I'm very fluent at talking about, yo, I'm dope, I'm crushing these other rappers, check me out, I'm ill off the top, blah, blah, blah. And that's beautiful, and that's the language of hip hop, and it's really important. And so that's always going to be a part of it. But I'm less fluent speaking on other subjects, and so why is that? Just from lack of experience, I think, So those are some of the things that are really challenging. But yeah, it will always change. And, you never master it in all aspects. There's always more to learn. Music is a lifelong pursuit, just like facing our fears. So it's a great question.
Oh, yeah. You may have answered it kind of too, with just like, maybe it's just sharpening the setup punchline. But, I'm trying to think based on this question. So like, solving the Harry Mack filler thing must have been one of the biggest level ups since from when you started putting your content out there in the way that you still do.
Yeah.
How did you actually attack fixing that a little bit? What was the new brick that you were able to add into your skill set to improve on that?
Yeah. The first thing is that I did was just, I would practice just leaving a gap of space instead of saying the filler phrase. So like, if it used to be like, give me a word.
Shatter.
It would be like, hey, yo, it's Harry Mack. I'm the illest rapper. Competition stepping. I'm about to make them shatter. It would become, I'm the illest rapper. Step to Harry Mack. I'm about to make you shatter. I stay in high demand. Keep the microphone clutched all inside my hand. I'm about to snap. I'm going over domes like a baseball cap. So it's like, okay, just leave a blank space. That's a start. But now the flow, and that can actually work really well and be really musical, because leaving space can be really musical, like Miles Davis is famous for like leaving a lot of space in his solos. So that can work. But if that was the only way that I could rhyme, that would start to become predictable, and which is really funny actually. It's like the negative filler phrase, It's like he starts every couplet with nothing. But also it would just be a little choppy too. So then it was just this thing that I'll try to explain here if I can, which is that line 2 of the couplet, when we're talking about setup punchline, is more important than line 1, right? Line 1 can almost be seen as something that functions to set up line 2, right? Setup, punchline. So the punchline packs the punch. And so oftentimes, like, the content of the setup line can be kind of, it can be kind of filler-ish, and it can still function pretty well. But the punchline side, I was always, even back then when I would start every couplet with my own name, I was always trying to say something like coherent that like really was sort of customized to whatever the target word was, right? Like, it's not like you're just saying random words and then you're fitting in a rhyme and doing the target word, obviously. Like, if the word is camera, you're not like leprechaun, backflip, trampoline, stanza, dirt for the worm on the backdrop camera. Like, unless you're doing a creative exercise, which is actually pretty fun, where you're like, let me try to say random shit, which is cool. I actually really like it. And maybe there's some subconscious meaning to it, which is great. But generally speaking, you would want to say like, back in the day when I was using filler phrases, it'd be like, hey, yo, it's Harry Mack. I dropped the ill stanzas. You can watch me now. Zoom in on your camera, right? That line, you can watch me now. Zoom in on your camera, is custom made to camera. And it's this skill I talked about recently on the podcast about like quickly working backwards to formulate a coherent sentence from said word. And so what I started working on after leaving the Gap, where I used to do a filler phrase, was like, whoa, is it possible for me to open up the mental bandwidth to do the same thing I do on the punchline side where I derive a custom phrase? Can I also do it on the setup side? So like, Sam, give me one more random word.
Window.
So ever since the day I was born, I've been dope. Opening up opportunities, windows, right? Ever since the day I was born, I've been dope. That's also something that makes sense. So I thought of been dope, but the old version of me would have said, hey, yo, it's Harry Mack. They know I always been dope. Instead of ever since the day I was born, I've always been dope, right? So it's like, can I give the same level of coherency and attention to the setup side as I'm giving to the punchline side? And how would that work? And it's really challenging, because the whole function of a filler phrase is to give you a mental breath at the beginning of every couplet. And that's what's buying you the time to say, okay, what rhymes with window? Okay, sneak that in real quick. And what can I say about window that's going to hit hard for the punchline? You do it during the filler phrase. So once I started trying to just say, well, what if I had to do it for both sides? It becomes this overlapping thing mentally where like, you kind of you're locking in your words for the first one. And before you're even halfway done saying them, you shift your brain to think about what you're going to say for the second one. And so they're always overlapped like this, And it took a long time and I had to start at slow tempos, but then eventually I could start to get into a flow with it, for a certain stretch of time. But it was kind of like a sprint, and like after like 8 bars, I would like stop. It felt like my brain was squeezed, but I would be like, whoa, that was powerful. Holy shit, that's the next wave. And, and I continue to practice that, and it's like, I have good days and bad days, but I think about it like Bill Evans, who we've talked about on the pod, talked about a lot, or at least or talked about at some point, and it's known, is that, you aim for a certain professional level where even on your worst day, you're still hitting a professional level. And you hope to go to that crazy level where it's like transcendent. You don't even know what happened, but you have no control over that. You just wake up one day and like the stars align. It's like a beautiful day and the coffee was really hitting just right and you got just enough sleep and you had some good dreams and your breakfast was perfect and blah, blah, blah. And everybody's in a good mood and the sun's shining and then you drop the beat and you're just like, damn, we did it, y'all. But then on the other days where you didn't get the coffee and it's raining outside and nobody's in a good mood, but you still show up and you drop the beat and you still do something and it's still great, So I'm not like always hitting this level of like pure coherency. Everything is custom made for the moment, but it's something to strive for.
I love that first step though, of just leaving the gap. I feel like that applies to so many different things you want to improve on, like in life. Is like basically what you're doing there is identifying that it's happening, like planting like a mental flag in it. You're like, whoops, there it is. Let me not.
Yes.
Which is like the hardest part of a habit, like for even conversational like things that are going on, like you kind of just tend to do over time. It's just that identifying.
Completely, dude. Yes, it's so true. And yeah, and that's the thing is like the hard part about practicing is that if you're really practicing, you're not sounding great. Like, because if you're sounding great, then what are you really working on? You already know how to do that. So it's like once I could do setup punchline and flow infinitely kind of with heavy reliance on filler phrases, it was like, dude, I'm good at this. It sounds good. It works. Like when I go out and do this, like audiences love it. Like, but then it's like, yeah, but like, okay, but how can you improve on it? And it's like, well, to improve on it, I would have to start leaving these arbitrary gaps, like breaks in the flow. Like now it doesn't sound as good to me, you know? Yeah. And that's not even it too, because sometimes I wouldn't leave the gap because I would get lost in what I was doing and I'd be like, flowing off the top when I do my thing. Onto every syllable I know they want to cling. Hey, yo, it's never mind. I'm about to come back with another. It's like now I have all these mistakes in it, and you have to voluntarily bring the mistakes in by saying, "Hey, I'm going to actually chip away at my weaknesses." You know, if you sound great every time you're in the practice room, you're not getting better, right? So that can be challenging. Like as you get skilled at something, it feels good to be skilled at something. It's like, man, I don't really like the feeling of like not being good at it. Like I worked a long time to overcome that feeling, and it's like, bro, you're never gonna overcome that. This is the theme of the podcast. This is the theme of today's podcast. You don't check it off, man. If it gets easy, you got to throw another weight on that bad boy. You know, if you've been in the comfort zone for a long time, even if your comfort zone is massive and encompasses things that are terrifying to most people, you're still in your comfort zone. And until you just expand it a little bit, you're not going anywhere, man. You're not growing, you know, and we're here to grow and get better. So yeah, that's what it is, baby.